so today we are going to be talking about the steps involved in doing a soccer throw-in. I know some of you are familiar with this, others are not, so hopefully you learned something today. And let's get started. So for those of you that aren't familiar what a soccer throw-in is or looks like, watch this video. Now that we know a little bit about a soccer throw-in and what is involved in it, we're going to break down into 4 steps. So step 1 is the step of your feet. Step 2 is flexion of the arm. Step 3 is extension of the arm. And step 4 is your toe drag. Phase 1 is the step phase, and that is where the person takes a step in motion to start the action of throwing the soccer ball. So the gluteal group has about 4 or 5 muscles in it that we're going to talk about today. The first one is the gluteus maximus. It extends and laterally rotates the hip. The gluteus minimus is the one that adducts and medially rotates the hip. And then also the gluteus medius does the same thing. It adducts and medially rotates the hip. Also in the gluteal group is the tensor fasciae latae. That is the one that maintains knee extension and adducts the hip. So a cool fact is the buttock muscles, they are very powerful and bulky. Their job is to complete their backward movement of the step. So when the muscle masses sag, this shows that they're not being used enough for the primary function, which is walking. So just to show a visual, the tensor fasciae latae, or the TFL, is right here to your right. The gluteus medius is to its immediate left, and right underneath it is the gluteus maximus. This is the gluteus minimus. Okay, so the quadriceps rectus femoris extends the knee and flexes the hip. Your quadriceps rectus femoris is located on your quads. So we're moving on down to it is in your hamstring. That is the semitendinosus. It extends your hip and flexes the knee. This is the semitendinosus muscle. The next muscle we are moving on to is the adductor brevis. This helps with the movement of the step, and that is its job is to adduct the hips. This is the location of the muscle. Now we are getting down to the lower part of your leg and your foot. So the tibulus posterior, that is the muscle that plantar flexes the foot. Vastus medialis extends the leg. The soleus, that plantar flexes the foot as well. The plantarius flexes the leg and plantar flexes the foot. So as we go ahead and talk about these different muscles, they all go hand in hand, so a lot of them generally move the same motion. As shown here, this is the plantarius and the soleus muscle. This is the vastus medialis. This is the tibulus posterior muscle. The flexor digitorum brevis flexes the metatarsal phalangeal and proximal interphalangeal joints of the digits 2 through 5 of your foot, and the extensor digitorum brevis extends toes 1 through 4. This is the flexor digitorum brevis. This is the extensor digitorum brevis. So the last muscle we're going to talk about today is the peroneus tertius that extends and everts the foot. So when you're taking that forward step, it's going to extend it down and evert the foot. This is the peroneus tertius muscle. Phase 2, this is where it's the flexion of the arms. So just a little reminder, this is what it looks like. So since it has a lot to do with your forearm and your arms and whatnot, we are going to start with the forearm. So that is where I'm going to talk about your biceps brachii. The function of the biceps at the elbow is the essential for the function of the forearm in lifting, so as lifting your soccer ball above your head. The brachialis, this is the next muscle I'll be talking about in your forearm. Its main function is to flex the forearm muscles at the elbow. The brachioradialis flexes the forearm at the elbow, especially when quick movements are required, such as throwing the soccer ball back over your head. The flexor carpi radialis provides flexion of the wrist and assists in abduction of the hand and wrist as well. So like rotating your wrist to pull that soccer ball back. The palmaris longus flexes the wrist and tenses the palmaris aponeurosis. Next, we're going to talk about the flexor digitorum profundus. This flexes the distal interphalangeal joint. Flexor digitorum superphalangeus flexes the proximal interphalangeal and secondary metacarpal phalangeal joints as well. This is the biceps brachii, the brachialis, the brachioradialis, the flexor carpi radialis, the palmaris longus, the flexor digitorum superphalangeus, and the flexor digitorum profundus muscle. The extensor digitorum flexes the digits of the hands and the wrist. Now we're moving on to the flexor pollicis brevis. That's in your thumbs. It flexes the metacarpal phalangeal joint and thumb. This is the extensor digitorum and the flexor pollicis brevis muscle. When using the flexion of the arm, we're going to have to use some back muscles as well. There's only a few that I'm going to talk about today. So interspinals group is the extension of the spine. That group of muscles is also used when using flexion of the arm, bringing it back over your head. This is the interspinals. Also in your back, the longus isthmus group muscles. That group of muscles extends the spine. This is the longismus group of muscles. So now we're moving on to phase 3 as the extension of the arm. So this is what it looks like again. Now that we know what it looks like, the pronator teres function is to rotate the forearm palm up and down. It's the part where you let go of the soccer ball. Next, the triceps brachii. This muscle moves at the back of the upper arm and extends the arm to stabilize the elbow when the hand is used for fine movements, such as releasing the soccer ball and throwing it forward. The brachioradialis, as was used in flexion, it also is used in extension. The forearm muscle that flexes at the arm at the elbow. So when we're like tensing to release, it's used. The extensor carpi radialis longus extends and abducts the hand at the wrist. The extensor carpi radialis longus extends and abducts the hand at the wrist. The extensor carpi radialis brevis extends the wrist, radically deviates the wrist as well. This is the triceps brachii, the brachioradialis, the extensor carpi radialis longus, the extensor carpi radialis brevis, and the extensor carpi ulnaris. Next is the pronator teres muscle and the extensor carpi radialis brevis. Extensor carpi ulnaris extends the wrist and ulnar deviates the wrist. So when we're using that extension of the muscles, you also use some head and neck muscles. So the sternocleidomastoid is the muscle in your head and neck region that we're going to talk about today. This is where it flexes the neck for that extension motion of the arms, throwing the soccer ball over your head. This is the sternocleidomastoid muscle. So you talk about a little bit of ab muscles because you're tensing them as you throw the soccer ball forward. So that's when we're going to use your external oblique muscles. That's where they support the abdomen wall, and that's a muscle that is used in extension of the arms and throwing the soccer ball forward, as I previously just said. So the rectus abdominis flexes the trunk and aids forced expiration and raised intra-abdominal pressure. So that's pretty much talking about how it flexes the trunk of your core and helps with that forward motion. On the left we have the external obliques, and on the right we have the rectus abdominis. Now we are on to phase 4. 4 is that toe drag that we're going to use to a little more of a oomph when we're throwing the soccer ball to complete the phase. So that's where we're going to use the lower leg and like thighs. The tibialis posterior muscle that plantar flexes the foot. I used a lot of these muscles before, as in taking a step and the toe drag. We'll see a few of them repeat. So the vastus medialis, also as spoken before, extends the leg. The soleus plantar flexes the foot, so that's the first foot being plantar flexed as the next one drags behind it. The plantarius flexes the leg and plantar flexes the foot. And the flexor digitorum brevis flexes the metatarsal phalangeal and proximal interphalangeal joints of digits 2 through 5. Extensor digitorum brevis extends toes 1 through 4. The pronator pronarius longus plantar flexes and everts the foot. The flexor hallucis brevis is the big toe, so that's going to be extending of the big toe. This is the tibialis posterior muscle, the plantarius, and the soleus, as mentioned before. The flexor digitorum brevis, the extensor digitorum brevis. The pronaris longus, the flexor hallucis brevis. The peroneus brevis plantar flexes and everts the foot and supports the lateral longitudinal arch, so that's that arch in your foot. So now we're moving on to the quadriceps. So the quadriceps femoris group is the next one I'm going to talk about. So they all extend the knee, and all of these muscles that extend the knee are the vastus lataris, the vastus medialis, and the vastus intermedius. And like I just said, all of them extend the knee. And lastly, we have the peroneus brevis muscle and the quadriceps femoris group of muscles.